The Senate will come to order. The senators will please take their seats. Those persons not entitled to the privilege of the floor will kindly retire to the gallery. The senators and all in attendance will stand and be led in prayer by the Reverend Mark Morrow, Crosswalk Community Church, Williamsburg. Thank you, Reverend.
Good afternoon, Senators. Welcome back, Pages, on your reunion. Can we gather for prayer? God, we recognize your presence, and I thank you. As a citizen of this Commonwealth, I thank you for each one of these public servants. Thank you for the time that they've sacrificed to lead and to legislate. And I ask that you give them wisdom as they deliberate about our laws. And I ask that there be a spirit of peace here. I thank you for them. Give them wisdom as they guide. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. The time has come to recognize visitors to the gallery, and first of all, it is just great to see our Pages back today. And as you all have heard me say before, this is the best program in the world that we have with Pages, and what a great opportunity for you all it is. And our staff makes this all possible for you all, so I know that you all are very appreciative of the experiences that they've given you. And I've had the pleasure this morning to talk to I think several different years, and it's just wonderful seeing you all mature into just such wonderful young ladies and gentlemen and young scholars. So we appreciate you coming back today and kind of rekindling relationships with your fellow Pages and kind of seeing what we're continuing to do. And never forget that one of the most valuable experiences that you'll have in life is public service. So we hope as you go forward, you'll continue to keep that in mind. I would ask the members of the Senate, but please, if all the Pages would stand, please, that would be wonderful. It's always good to see you all. Thank you all so much. The senior senator from Henrico, Senator McEachin.
Mr. President, I rise for the introduction.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, as you know, today is Martin Luther King holiday, and we have any number of visitors to the Capitol on this day. But today, Your Honor, is also the Mr. President, it's also the 8th annual Kappa Legislative Day. Kappa Alpha Psi is a fraternity that was founded in 1911. They were gracious enough to let me cross the burning sands in 1980. And you will see them here today with their red ties on, not dissimilar to mine. And they are in the gallery today in both the House and the Senate. And Mr. President, I would ask that you give them the warm welcome of the Senate.
Thank you, Senator. Would members from Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity please rise? And I do recognize you all. Thank you all for being here today and advocating on what you feel is important to the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's always great to have you all here each year. And I didn't realize a good senator from Henrico was a member. So it's got to be a great group. So thank you. And I would ask the members of the Senate to please join me in offering members of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity the warm welcome of the Senate. The junior senator from Loudoun, Senator Wexton.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the Journal could reflect that my seatmate, the senator from Accomack, is away from the Capitol on pressing personal business.
Thank you, Senator. The Journal will reflect that the senator from Accomack is away from the Capitol on pressing personal business. The senator from Arlington, Senator Favola.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for purposes of an introduction.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you. I want to take a moment to recognize the Virginia Young Democrats. This group is here because they care about their future and they care about the governing process. I encourage lawmakers to take a moment to speak to members of this group. I think this will be a wonderful learning experience, and it's always interesting to see the intersection of politics and policy. I ask the Senate to give the Virginia Young Democrats a warm welcome.
Thank you, Senator. Would members from the Virginia Young Democrats please rise? You all are powerful in numbers today, and thank you so much for being here. I enjoyed visiting with you all this morning, and thank you for all the advocacy work. It's just great to get young folks involved as the senator said, in policy and politics. So thank you all for being here. Hope you have a wonderful day at Mr. Jefferson's Capitol. I would ask the members of the Senate to please join me in offering the Virginia Young Democrats the warm welcome of the Senate. The senator from Petersburg, Senator Dance.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for the purpose of an introduction.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Richmond Crusade for Voters was founded in 1956 and remains very involved in the city of Richmond and the greater Richmond area. Their mission is to increase the membership and participation in activities of the organization and make our elected officials accountable to the citizens. And their purpose is to increase the voting strength of the population of the city of Richmond and to improve the moral, social, economic, educational, and general welfare. Additionally, they seek to establish voter registration and voter education in the city of Richmond and issue such policy statements, institutes such programs that will improve the economic, educational, general welfare, and solidarity of the people. Truly, this group is staying true to its mission and purpose as it's represented here today with members of its executive board and a group of 25 students from across the Richmond City Public Schools. Earlier this morning, senior senators from Henrico and I had the honor of greeting and welcoming these students to the Capitol. It is the first visit for many of these outstanding students and future leaders of the Commonwealth, but I'm sure it will not be their last, Mr. President. I would ask that we give them a warm Senate welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Would members from the Richmond Crusade for Voters please rise? Thank you all so much for being here this morning. And again, thank you for advocating on your principles and values. There's nothing more important to democracy than voting. So we appreciate all the work that you're doing. I would ask the members of the Senate to please join me in offering the Richmond Crusade for Voters the warm welcome of the Senate. The clerk will please call the roll. All those present will please vote aye. The clerk will close the roll.
Senate Journal for Friday, January 15th, 2016.
The senator from Newport News, Senator Miller, moves that the reading of the journal be waived. All in favor of waiving the reading of the journal will record their votes aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their votes? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 30, noes 8.
Ayes 30, noes 8. The reading of the journal is waived. The clerk will please report any communications from the House of Delegates. Senator from James City County, Senator Norment.
Mr. President, I respectfully move that we waive the reading of any communications received from the House of Delegates.
Thank you, Senator. The question is, shall the reading of the communication be waived? All in favor of waiving the reading of the communication from the House of Delegates will record their votes aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their votes? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 37, noes 2.
Ayes 37, noes 2. The reading of the communication is waived. The clerk will please report any communications from the governor.
We do not have any, sir.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The time has come to welcome visitors to the gallery and take up matters of the morning hour. The senator from James City County, Senator Norment.
Mr. President, I rise for purposes of introduction.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would appreciate it if you would extend a warm welcome to our minister this morning who extended and presented the invocation to start our session. Mark Rumpmeyer has been a friend of mine for a number of years. He and his wife, Pam, were the founding pastors of Crosswalk Community Church. It's very interesting. They started their ministry in Williamsburg in 2001 in their living room, and it consisted of 25 individuals who became members of their congregation. Since that period of time, he and Pam, through their faith and persistence and his charisma, have grown to where they have, I believe, 2 churches in Williamsburg and James City County, one in Newport News, one in Virginia Beach, and one somewhere else that escapes me at the moment. But I was interested, my good friend from Northern Virginia, who frequently observes the presentation of invocations, indicated, Mr. President, that if we were rating invocations on a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being superlative, that the words and remarks that Mark Marrow delivered this morning were a 10 on the scale, and it don't get no better than that. So if you would please thank Mark for his inspiration and for his diligent effort in spreading the faith across the Commonwealth of Virginia, I'd be most appreciative.
Thank you, Senator. Would the Reverend Mark Morrow please rise? Sir, thank you so much for being here this afternoon and getting us off to a good start. We, as the senator from James City County said, we admire what you've been able to accomplish over the years and certainly appreciate the many lives that you've touched. I'd ask the members of the Senate to please join me in offering the Reverend Mark Morrow the warm welcome of the Senate. The senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for purposes of a second and last introduction for today.
The senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I would appreciate it if you would extend a very warm welcome to some guests that have in the gallery today. And the guests are Anthony Bedell, who many of you may know. He has been the rector of Radford University and a frequent visitor here to the Capitol. But more importantly, with him today are his children. He has brought Liam, Rose, and Molly, and they all come from Springfield, Virginia. So if you would be so kind to extend a warm welcome to the Bedell family who is joining us here today, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Would Anthony Bedell and your family please rise? Wow. Welcome, sir. And I believe, you said from Radford University. Is that, yes? We were just out there this summer for Boys Club, and what a beautiful campus that is. So you have a lot to be proud of. I thank you for visiting today. I'd ask the members of the Senate to please join me in offering Anthony Bedell and his wonderful family the warm welcome of the Senate. The senator from Fauquier, Senator Vogel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for purposes of an introduction.
The senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. You had me very worried. I couldn't believe you had started without me while my guests were in the gallery. I'm very pleased they made it in the gallery on this very busy day. I am very excited that I have local representatives from Berryville, Virginia, from a Girl Scout troop visiting today. I have Scouts Lauren Dilzer, Leah Krieb, Shaylin Mickle, Kendra Mickle, Taylor Mickle, and Alicia Simon. Their leader is Sherry Mickle, and they are also accompanied by chaperones Dr. Scott Dilzer and Laurie Krieb and Mrs. Krieb's son, Aiden Krieb. And I got to visit with them this morning in the office, and I'm delighted that they actually made it in the gallery this morning amidst all the people. So if you would please extend to them the very warm welcome of the Senate.
Well, thank you, Senator. Would members from Girl Scout Troop 40934 please rise? Welcome to Richmond and welcome to the gallery of the Senate. And we always enjoy our visits from the Girl Scouts and all the wonderful things that you all do each year. And I know you're doing well in school and obeying your scout leader and obeying your parents, and that they will lead you in a good direction. And the one question I do have, I guess, is when will the Girl Scout cookies be coming out? So will that be soon? Soon? All right, good deal. I'd ask the members of the Senate to please join me in offering Girl Scout Troop 40934 the warm welcome of the Senate. The senior senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
Mr. President, I would hope to have you extend a warm welcome to Ms. Julie Strandy, who's the the mother of Carolyn Lemons, who was a page last year. Ms. Strandy is on the Planning Commission in Fairfax County from the Mason Magisterial District. And in Fairfax County, for those of you who don't know, a single magisterial district is about 125,000, 130,000 people. I would ask you to please extend the warm wishes of the Senate of Virginia.
Thank you, Senator. Would Ms. Julie Stanley please rise? There you are. Thank you for being here this morning. It's good to see you again, and what a great day to have all of our pages back in the Capitol with us. It's always wonderful to see you, and thanks for being here today. I'd ask the members of the Senate to please join me in offering Julie Stanley the warm welcome of the Senate. The senator from Russell, Senator Chafin.
Mr. President, I rise for the purpose of an introduction.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. With us today in the gallery are members of the Virginia School Board Association's Task Force on Workforce Readiness. We have present Bill Kidd, the Virginia School Board Association President and Wythe County School Board member, Dr. Tom Brewster, Superintendent of Pulaski County Schools, Dr. Keith Perrigan, Superintendent of Norton City Schools, Jarvis Bailey, the Fredericksburg City School Board member, and Dr. Greg Smith, the Superintendent of the Richmond County Schools. The mission of this group is to support school divisions by identifying and promoting workforce readiness opportunities that enable students to be prepared to succeed in a new economy. Please give them the warm welcome of the Senate.
Thank you, Senator. Would members from the Virginia School Board Association Task Force on Workforce Readiness please rise? Thank you all for being here this morning, and we're all working together on our public education system and making sure people, our young scholars, are ready to enter the workforce. So it's very important to building our economy and moving Virginia forward. So we really appreciate all of your efforts. I'd ask the members of the Senate to please join me in offering the Virginia School Board Association Task Force on Workforce Readiness the warm welcome of the Senate. The senator from Franklin, Senator Stanley.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. I rise for the purposes of an introduction.
Good afternoon, sir. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, in our gallery today, we have the pleasure of having two of my favorite people from Southwest Virginia, and I also have the privilege of sitting next to their husband and father as my new seatmate. Mr. President, up in the gallery today, we have Paula Carrico, the lovely wife of my Senate seatmate, Charles William Carrico, and his lovely daughter, Emily Carrico, who was a Senate page, if you do recall, Mr. President. And she's also sitting up there with some of their great Senate pages of years past who have come back to say hello to us. So it was great to see them as well today. But if you would give them the warm welcome in the Senate, I'd certainly appreciate it.
I sure will. Thank you, Senator. Would Ms. Carrico and your wonderful family please rise? It's always great to see you back in Richmond and here to keep an eye on and support your husband, the good Senator Carrico, and we appreciate working with him. Appreciate you letting him come. I know it's a long distance from home for him to be here and serve his constituents, but we always welcome you here. I would ask members of the Senate to please join me in offering Ms. Carrico and her daughter the warm welcome of the Senate. Resolutions, petitions, and bills are now in order. Is there any other business for the morning hour? I'm sorry, the senior senator from Enrico, Senator McEachin. Any other business? The clerk will please call the calendar.
Senate calendar for Monday, January 18th, 2016. We do not have a calendar.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Mr. President, being very complimentary of the clerk and her staff on the way that they're managing the calendar, we're moving with great expediency. Inquiry of the clerk. Does that complete today's calendar, ma'am?
What we had, yes, sir.
Good. Mr. President.
Yes, Senator from James City County.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Senator Hanger and myself, I wanted to share with the Senate that the staff of the Senate Finance Committee will present an overview of the governor's proposed amendments on the budget on Senate Bill 29 or the caboose bill or Senate Bill 30. The briefing will take place in the Senate Finance Committee meeting on Tuesday, which is tomorrow, January the 19th at 9 a.m. in Senate Room B. And all senators are invited and encouraged, especially if you're not on the Finance Committee, to please attend and have the benefit of that overview. So Senator Hanger and I would be extremely appreciative if all of you would attend and at least get a preliminary overview of the budget.
Thank you, Senator. The senator from Western Fairfax County, Senator Morriston.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. As some of you might know, I put a sign up outside my office in anticipation of Gun Lobby Day to emphasize that I believe that the gun lobby's obstruction to a lot of common sense legislation is getting some folks hurt. And I got to tell you, this is one of the best days I've had here in a couple of years. Needless to say, I was very popular. I had about 8 different groups come through, filled the office, and we had a great exchange of information. I'm so proud to be from Virginia, where people on both sides of an issue like that can come in, and I learned a lot from them. I hope they learned a lot from me. And over the weekend, I put a picture of it up on Facebook, and it took off. Most people liked it, but it broke through the boundaries of the Commonwealth, and it appears I am not very popular in Kansas. And some of my new fans call me some interesting names, hoped that I would get stabbed while they watched so they could shoot the perpetrator afterwards, as I'm not worth saving. Asked that I give up my armed guards, and if anybody's packing in here, don't protect me. And I got yelled at in print, if you will, if you can do that. It's all capital letters, that I needed to learn the Constitution. And, concealed weapon is not a Second Amendment right. It's a privilege granted by law, but I support it. It's worked reasonably well and actually might make us safer at an ATM compared to other states that don't have concealed carry. I work for a justice research firm, and it's true. There are some benefits, but that's where it stops. I believe that if we can strengthen the training requirements around concealed permits, then we might be able to count on the good guy with a gun theory that Wayne LaPierre has proposed, if we have people better prepared to act. You don't have to. You're not there to protect everybody. You're there to protect yourself. But I want to make sure that people are prepared. The Attorney General, in his decision to rule that state police enforce our laws related to reciprocal arrangements for concealed weapon holders from other states, I think was the right decision. I have had my Second Amendment lobby to my house for coffee. I have conservative-only town hall meetings. And I hear one consistent theme: enforce the laws that are on the books. Well, folks, I believe this is a law that is on the books. They say, why don't you enforce the existing gun laws? The Attorney General is, and I support him for doing it, and I thank him for doing it. I support the Second Amendment, and I'm sworn to uphold it as the Supreme Court has interpreted it. The Second Amendment provides that individuals have the right to own a firearm. The Heller and McDonald Supreme Court decisions made that abundantly clear. It was also made clear that not every gun law is a violation of the Constitution. This idea that any law violates the Constitution is flat out wrong and dangerous. Well, let me stop here and say one thing. No one is coming to take your guns away. It's time for the gun lobby to stop trying to scare their members and help us pass legislation that will actually help save some lives. Universal background checks save lives. Studies have shown this. Common sense tells us this is true. Keeping weapons out of the hands of those who have protective orders taken out against them saves lives. Studies have shown this to be true. Common sense tells us this is true. Something like 80 to 90% of all Virginians and Americans agree on these issues, but somehow the lobby stymies us time and time again and prevents us from passing legislation. Those visiting us today, to talk about guns, see the management of firearms very differently from others of us. You know, all of us come to our beliefs through many influences: family, social systems, culture, professional life. For many, guns bring back memories of Dad, the bonding during hunting trips and target practice, and the passing on of lessons and responsibility for a potentially dangerous tool. A rite of passage that was cherished and is therefore important to pass on. A social system and culture that holds the same values help to hold a community together. Shared beliefs. But some kids don't have dads, and despite the pleadings of adults and teachers, the lure of a gun as a sign of manhood is often irresistible. For me, my beliefs about guns have come from 45 years spent as a probation officer, detention superintendent, Virginia Juvenile Justice Director, and technical assistance consultant for the U.S. Department of Justice, helping them in their efforts to reduce youth violence around the country. You know, it starts out, you know, a happy, healthy, young gun-owning family in search of protection, but their world can be overtaken by life, overtaken by alcohol abuse, depression, or an angry and disturbed adolescent. And that gun purchased for a noble purpose can become the genesis of a family's tragedy. You know, our lives change, but the nature of the gun never does. The gun remains in the home without ever creating a problem until perhaps the owner passes away and their guns begin a new journey. Hopefully a safe one. But as too often happens, it is passed on to a child who sells or pawns it, or gives it to Cousin Joe, who sometimes introduces it to the street, or has it stolen, or does something foolish with it himself. I've seen it all. A lot of you are prosecutors and have been in law enforcement. You've seen it too. The life of a gun is like a giant sifting process. As the gun, over a generation or two, works its way to the bottom of the responsibility period, and ultimately a tragic use. Look, we can all disagree on how firearms should be managed, and there is no law or series of laws that will save every life, stop every criminal. But is anyone happy with the level of violence in our country and in our Commonwealth? If guns save lives, how come so many people are dying? We have more guns in this country than we've ever had before, but we will hit the 500,000 mark on gun deaths in this century sometime in 2016. We lose 88 to 90 people per day, 32,000 per year, and for the first time in more than 60 years, the death rate for Americans killed by firearms is as high as the mortality rate linked to motor vehicle accidents. We can we could solve some of these problems by putting together an ad hoc study group to take a look at our laws and try to find something that will work and be consistent with the Second Amendment. The Centers for Disease Control should be studying this, but are not allowed to study gun violence as a public health issue by federal law. Even the author of that law would like a do-over. We can prevent some of these deaths and put an end to this trend. The time to act is now. Let's work together and pass legislation that will actually make a difference, actually save lives, and actually not interfere with anyone's right to defend themselves. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. The senior senator from Loudoun, Senator Black.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise on a point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I wish to respond very briefly, not in depth, to the remarks of my esteemed colleague. And there's one particular point that I would like to single out. This is the comment that no one wants to take your guns. Well, I was the chief of the Criminal Law Division at the Pentagon in the early 90s. And I testified before a congressional committee relative to some gun smuggling that was taking place at the end of the Gulf War. There had been an order in place that prohibited guns from being brought back, and as a result, there were a number of prosecutions. Some members of Congress were upset about that, and I was defending the Department of Defense's position relative to those prosecutions. When I was finished, I was approached by a very close aide of Chuck Schumer's. And I'm not sure to this day whether it was his chief of staff, but it was obviously someone of considerable influence. He was a congressman at the time. And he came to me, he said, Chuck Schumer would like to speak with you. Because I believe that they had the impression that because of the work that I had done, that I was very much an advocate
against guns rather than, frankly, I was rather neutral on the issue, but I was very much a constitutionalist. So I went over to Chuck Schumer's office, expecting to see him. He was called out to have to vote on a bill. So I ended up speaking with the chief of staff or whoever it was, and in the course of that discussion, he complimented me on my presentation before the committee, and he then expounded on Chuck Schumer's philosophy about guns. And he told me, he said, you know, he said, Chuck Schumer believes that there should be no guns in the hands of any private citizen. And I responded, and I said, you mean even rifles and shotguns? He says, absolutely. He said, there should be no guns whatsoever in the hands of private citizens. And of course, I was respectful as a colonel in the military. I was not going to be argumentative. However, I recall leaving that office with this strange feeling that I had just left the office of a congressman who had no regard whatsoever for the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. And it was a very odd feeling at that moment because I was naive, honestly. I had been out in the field. I hadn't been a Washington insider until just recently. And I believe that we all respected the U.S. Constitution, including the Bill of Rights. And I just recall quite vividly walking out and thinking, I am leaving the office of a very influential congressman who does not believe in the Second Amendment. Now, I've heard over the years many times things where people say, well, you don't have to worry about this. The fact that we're doing thus and so doesn't mean that eventually we're going to do away with marriage, or we're going to do away with this or do away with that. I'm going to tell you, this idea, this concern that people have that taking one step forward on something like guns is going to eventually result in their registration and their elimination is dead serious. There is every chance in the world that Chuck Schumer will end up being the head of the Democrats in the Senate. And I have no doubt that he has not changed his opinion since those times in the early 90s when he made it quite clear he does not believe that you should have any guns, you should not have a shotgun, you should not have a rifle. And so I would just ask my colleague and those who are on the other side of this issue to be a little bit understanding that this is not paranoia. This is based on fact, and we will not yield on the Second Amendment. It is in the Constitution. It is our right. And those who say, well, you know, we need to do this or that, change the Constitution. If you don't like the Second Amendment, the individual's right to keep and bear arms, change the Constitution. It can be done. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. The senator from Buckingham, Senator Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I can't sit here today as a student of the Constitution of the United States and a person whose avocation is outside this chamber is to persuade people based on facts and evidence and remain silent in the face of the suggestions of my, and I mean it in this instance, good friend and colleague from Fairfax. I was a prosecutor for a little while. This is the first speech I've started that off with, this year off with, and had the occasion to come into contact with a number of serious cases. And one of them that happened relatively early on after I was elected to be a prosecutor involved a lady who had been the subject of repeated horrible domestic abuse, and a husband whose medication and self-medication was something that he had a difficult time controlling. That lady moved from her home into the home of a brother in the county. And the abusive spouse one day, after not getting right with his meds and maybe self-medicating a little bit, decided he was going to go over there. Well, the brother with whom she lived was confined almost entirely to a wheelchair. In other words, he could get up, but he couldn't move very far. And the abuser came over to that house one day and forced his way in through the door and began to beat on that woman, and she was helpless to do anything. And the brother in the wheelchair said, "Stop hitting my sister, stop hitting my sister." And the abuser said something to the effect of, "When I'm done hitting her, you're next." Pardon me, I almost slipped. And so we went back to beating this man's sister, his estranged wife, while the individual in the wheelchair made his way to a front closet where he retrieved a .22 caliber bolt action rifle, suitable for squirrel hunting. Returned to that room, leveled that weapon, and discharged that weapon one time, striking the offender in the sternum and killing him instantly. And the Louisa County Sheriff's Office called me from the scene and said, "What shall we charge him with?" And I said, "Give me the facts again. I want to make sure I got this right." And they gave me the facts again and said, "What shall we charge the man in the wheelchair with?" And I said, "You charge him with being a good shot." The fact of the matter is, guns do save lives. Guns in the hands of responsible gun owners save far more lives than they cost. The statistics sort of promulgated and pushed by the other side include the tragedy of self-inflicted gunshot wounds with intent, which bridges to the next issue, which is a mental health issue. Sun Hui Cho wasn't working well with his meds, but we knew he had mental health issues. Fester Flanagan, mental health issues, said the meds don't work anymore. James Holmes, who purchased his firearms with federal student aid, Jared Loeffner, Adam Lanza, and the one that's most repugnant to me as a Christian, Dylan Roof, were all off their meds. It's virtually impossible to find this out because of HIPAA. But beyond the gun, there's a common thread here. And let's attack the problem where it exists, not where we wish it did. Let me give you some statistics, and I don't want to shamelessly plug my out-of-work outside the General Assembly business, but I've literally put my money where my mouth is on this. Concealed permit holders are responsible for 1/200th of crimes. You literally can't find offenses, 1/200th of crimes. So it is quite literally the concealed carry permit holding universe already, with the current training requirements, the safest, most law-abiding, these are the folks that some of you will scowl at when you see them in that building over there, the safest, most law-abiding segment of the entire population of the Commonwealth. And the reality of gun violence and gun deaths, non-self-inflicted, is this. The homicide rate in the states with the 10 toughest gun control laws in the nation is higher than the homicide rate in states with the 10 least restrictive gun control laws in the nation. The murder rate, the robbery rate, the rape of violent rape is higher in states with restrictive gun control laws. There have been drops, incredible drops, and Florida and Texas are indicative from about 1988, when we went from about 10 shall issue states to the point where we are now. I think we're at 38. Like 50, 70% drops in the period of a year. And the vast bulk of these homicides occur in places, ironically, controlled by the party that screams the loudest about gun control. I mean, I'll mention the elephants in the corner. I don't know when the last time there was a Republican mayor of Chicago was. Detroit, New Orleans, Washington, D.C. And so the reality is then we have a circumstance here where we blame the instrumentality and not the individual, which I can't think of any other circumstance where we do that, zero. And where we cherry pick our statistics in order to advance an argument which is not true with 99% of the gun-owning public. And so while I admire the senator from Fairfax, I take great exception with his application of the facts. And the facts are that where you are lawfully owning a firearm and legally possessing that firearm, you are far safer than would you be if that were not the case. And the numbers bear me out. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. The senator from Grayson, Senator Carrico.
Thank you, Mr. President. Point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I don't do this often, but, after hearing the gentleman from Fairfax speak, I wanted to touch on a few things. And, coming from a law enforcement background, the old saying that seconds count when the police are minutes away is really true. And everyone in law enforcement does understand that. One of the things that strikes me so odd as His Excellency had implemented Executive Order 50 was that there was no evidence to go along with how many law-abiding concealed weapon holders actually had targeted any state grounds. And as we here on the General Assembly grounds are afforded the protection from the Capitol Police and surrounding us, what about those at VDOT? What about those at DMV? What about the times that you drive down the interstate and decide that you really need to go to the restroom and you stop at the rest area, that you're criminally violating a trespass law now that the executive order is in place, Executive Order 50? What about those times? What about the times that you work at DMV or VDOT and you have a protective order because you're being threatened and they know now that you can't be protected because you're on a state facility? What about those times? What about the reciprocity issue of revoking the reciprocity with all these states? Being a legislator that represents an area that is bordered by Tennessee, North Carolina, West Virginia, and Kentucky. And a lot of times to get to a place in Virginia and Southwest Virginia, you got to go through those states. You can't just go around them. You've got to go through it. No evidence. Enforcing the law means you have evidence to show that there's a problem. No evidence has been produced that any law-abiding concealed weapon holder has committed any crime that led to the revocation of this reciprocity. In Bristol, Virginia, you can stand on State Street and straddle the double solid line, and depending on which side your holster's on, you could be in violation of the law. These are the things that just bother me about this whole anti-gun movement. And I say, Mr. President, that maybe nothing that I said today has resonated, but I will say this one thing. If Virginians wanted Bloomberg to be their governor, they would have elected him. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. The senior senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
Here we go. Here comes Saslaw. Here comes the pain train.
Mr. President, you hear a lot of talk from both sides about guns. And just a couple of observations. And you can Google the article. San Diego Press did a story, and I got it up in my office. I printed it out. It's lengthy. It's 2 parts, ran 2 days, and if you Xerox it, it's like 15 pages. But there was they did a study. In 2010, the European Community had 17 members. Those 17 members had 511 million people. The U.S. that year, we did the census, the U.S. had 318 million, maybe 319, I'm not sure. But it's approximately 60% of what they had. Gun deaths in Europe were that year, gun homicides, not gun deaths, gun homicides were 1,164. Gun homicides in the U.S. that year were 9,960. Now, you hear a lot of talk about a good guy with a gun is going to stop a bad guy with a gun. There's 288 million, maybe 289 million guns outstanding in the civilian population today. Incidentally, we're 2.4% of the world's population. We're 42% of the private gun owners, all right? I guess my question would be to anybody on either side of this argument is, with X amount of people being shot and killed in this country every day, you would think that somewhere, somehow, that good guy with the gun would stop that bad guy with the gun. I mean, we got 300 million people in this country, 288 million guns. Surely somewhere, some good guy with a gun is going to stop the bad guy with the gun. I suspect the reason that you don't read too much about that is a couple things. Number one, and this may come as a shock to some people, the Lone Ranger's dead. So's Hopalong Cassidy, Roy Rogers, and Gene Autry, okay? The guy that shot the gun out of the hands of the bad guy, they're dead. They're dead. The other problem, I suspect, and I've had prosecutors and liability lawyers, or whatever y'all call yourselves, tell me, if somebody comes in here and starts shooting, or any place, and you take out your gun and in the process of maybe even killing this guy, you injure 4 or 5 people, these lawyers have told me you better have one heck of an insurance policy, because you're going to need it after you get finished getting sued. And if you kill somebody who was not the guy with the gun, you're going to be prosecuted with a minimum of manslaughter charge. Now, the situation, the only one that I've ever read about, there may have been others, but the only one I've ever read about where somebody present had a gun and didn't use it was when that Congress lady from Arizona got killed. And there was either 1 or 2 people there that did have their guns with them, and they had permits. And they said that they didn't use the guns because they were fearful of hitting innocent people. And therein lies the problem, okay? There's no easy answers to this whole problem. But, and the other thing, in that article, they quoted a study, a 2-year study done, it was published in the New England Medical Journal. Now, the study was somewhat flawed because they included homicides, so cut it by 53%, 54%, because that's what I understand most gun deaths are in this country, are suicides. But if you had a gun in your, if you have a gun in your house, you have a 43 times, and that includes homicides, and like I said, cut it by slightly more than half if you just, if you go with regular gun deaths. But you got a 43 times greater chance of having a family member or an acquaintance of the family killed than you do of shooting an intruder. 43 times more likely. So nobody wants to take anybody's guns. I'm not voting to take people's guns away from them. And as Senator Morrison pointed out, this, you know, everybody says enforce the laws, enforce the laws. I got news for you. Y'all voted for that law. Now, not you all, but the people who were here before you when we put that on the books. They voted for it. They had to have the same requirements we had, okay? So, I mean, you know, and by the way, just so some of you may or may not know, I have fired in M1. I have fired in M16, a 30 caliber machine gun, a 50 caliber machine gun, a 155 howitzer. I've crawled under machine gun. I fired a flamethrower and rifle-propelled grenades. And I'm not anti-gun, okay? And I know what a gun is, and I know what a gun can do. And believe you me, I know what a flamethrower. And incidentally, as you all know, you can now buy a flamethrower online. And we don't want to outlaw that, because when we do outlaw it, only the outlaws will have flamethrowers. And everybody also knows that flamethrowers don't burn people, people burn people. So anyway, that's the latest from this side. And I'll be glad to talk to anybody about that, but you can Google most of everything I've said, and you'll see who printed it, okay? But if that PolitiFact guy, whoever he is with the Richmond Times-Dispatch, I got the article, what they used, and he's welcome to it, if their reporter is here. All right. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all for putting up with me.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Senator. The senator from Arlington. Senator Favola.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to note that most Virginians are in the middle on this issue. They are not on the polarizing sides that have been portrayed in this conversation. We have had bills that have come up, certainly in the Senate, that have attempted to take guns away from folks who were convicted of misdemeanor sexual assaults, and a professor from the University of Virginia stood before the committee and said, folks that demonstrate violent behavior will always escalate that behavior. So why can't we make laws based on fact? Because then you can be in the position of actually preventing violence. What about folks under protective orders? Again, a judge has made a determination that this individual should be under protective order, should not have visitation opportunities and whatnot, because violent behavior had been demonstrated. So there are ways that we can try to limit the access to firearms by people who really should not have that access, by people who are not going to use the firearms responsibly, and by people who will put others at great risk. I think those are the kinds of questions that we should consider when we're talking about this gun debate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. The senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain.
Mr. President, point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
You know, I wasn't planning to stand up, but I take any opportunity I can to try and educate the senior senator from Fairfax County. And he indicated that he's unaware of any situations in which somebody who actually has a gun was able to actually stop a crime. It must happen sometime. It must happen somewhere. And indeed, he's right. As a matter of fact, the senator from somewhere in Southwest Virginia, from Grayson County, I guess represents Grundy. Actually, Senator Chafin represents Grundy. We have a university in Grundy, the Appalachian School of Law. And you may not remember, but in January of 2002, an armed man went into to Appalachian School of Law with a gun. He was not a concealed carry permit holder. He was a disgruntled student who apparently was mentally ill, and he started shooting. Killed 3 members of the college community. There happened to be 3 other students, one named Michael Gross and a second named Tracy Bridges. They're gun owners. They did not have their weapons on them, but when the shooting started, they ran to their cars and they got their guns. And they were joined by a 3rd student, an ex-Marine. And they encountered the shooter. And they stopped him. They drew down on him, told him to drop his gun, and jumped him. And but for those 2 students' decision to run towards the chaos and towards the violence with their guns, there may not have been just 3 dead in Grundy that day. And indeed, it happens here in the Commonwealth of Virginia that law-abiding gun owners step in and save lives. That may not happen every day, but the point that has been made is that the law-abiding citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia are not the ones that we're afraid of. And the people who have concealed carry permits are among the safest, the most law-abiding that there are in the United States. We ought to respect those rights. We ought not further undermine them. And I'm proud to stand up for the Second Amendment rights of citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Thank you, Senator.
Mr. President, point of personal privilege, just a response to that. I'm looking at an article here, y'all, by the Florida Sun. And apparently Florida as of 2006, had already handed out 1,400 concealed weapons permits to law-abiding citizens who had criminal records, 218 outstanding warrants for concealed weapons permits, including 14 wanted for murder. Okay?
The senator from Buckingham, Senator Garrett.
Mr. President, point of personal privilege, I'll try to be brief. A great statesman from the other side of the aisle in the 1980s said, "You're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts." The 5 nations on earth where you're most likely to die in a mass shooting adjusted for population are in order: Norway, Finland, Slovakia, Israel, and Switzerland. In the last 30 years, there have been 61 mass shooting incidents in the United States. 38 of the shooters had a pre-identified, pre-existing, pre-diagnosed mental health problem by professionals. I could stand here and cite incident after incident of law-abiding gun owners stopping crimes, but instead I'll quote Gary Kleck, PhD and professor of criminology at Florida State, who's the author of Point Blank, Gun Violence in America. His best numbers, along with Dr. Gertz, are that there are up to 2.5 million defensive uses of a firearm in the United States every single year, which far, far outstrips the number of criminal uses of firearms. We own 42% of the firearms on the planet. You'd think it would be shocking if you learned that when defining a mass shooting as an incident wherein 3 or more people were killed, wouldn't it be shocking to know that in the last, since 1950, so 65 years, there's been exactly 1 mass shooting, Gabby Giffords, in a gun-free zone. When you use those statistics, national statistics on what is a mass shooting, since 1950, there's been 1 mass shooting that wasn't in a zone where someone had decried that the individuals there were not allowed to carry firearms. So we agree there's a problem, and that's the first step towards solving it. But I would point out that you're 2.5 times more likely to be beaten to death with hands or feet, 3 times more likely to be killed with a knife than you are to be killed with an assault weapon. So now that we've agreed there's a problem, let's identify it. The consistent fact is gun-free zones aren't. Gun-free zones cost lives. Criminals intentionally avoid gun-free zones, as borne out by 6 years of data. And law-abiding gun owners who find themselves in assault in this nation are the least of our problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. The senator from Grayson, Senator Carrico.
Point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Since the gentleman brought up the facts, I find it very difficult for me to sit here and not give you this example. Memorial Day 2014, as I was leaving the restaurant with my mother and father, who are 78 years old, an altercation took place in a parking lot. The gentleman who was arguing with the lady that was in front of him overheard my mother say that someone needed to call the police. As I rounded the corner in my vehicle, the gentleman had then begun to take aim at my father. I yelled at him to get back in his vehicle. He then proceeded his anger towards me. As I stopped my vehicle, my wife and I were sitting in my new pickup truck, which really made me mad, and came from around the front of the pickup truck. Out of his left rear pocket came the weapon. My son happened to be in the parking lot, who saw it going on. My sister happened to be in the parking lot, called the police that he had a gun, was going to shoot me. The first indication I had was to get my weapon, which was at that time actually not on my side but in my vehicle. I hit the gentleman with my door, knocked him back, pulled my gun, and I was prepared to shoot. And he took one more swipe at the window. He saw the gun, he saw my son, and began to flee. I chased him through the parking lot, got him to his car. He took off, tried to run over my son. We got the tag number. He is in prison. Mr. Druss is doing 2 years for attempted malicious wounding. So if weapons don't deter crimes and personally protect you, then explain that situation to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Is there any other business to come before the Senate? The clerk will please report any announcements on the desk.
Today, Monday, January 18th, the Committee on Commerce and Labor will meet 15 minutes after adjournment, Senate Room B. The Committee on General Laws and Technology will meet 45 minutes after adjournment, Senate Room A. The Finance Subcommittee on Health and Human Resources will meet at 4 p.m., 10th floor conference room, Senators Hanger, Howell, Alexander, Barker, and Donovan. The Northern Virginia delegation will meet at 5 p.m. in the 6th floor speakers conference room. Tomorrow, Tuesday, January 19th, the Finance Subcommittee on Economic Development and Natural Resources will meet at 7:30 a.m., 10th floor conference room, Senators Ruff, Saslaw, Wagner, Alexander, and Obenshain. The Committee for Finance will meet at 9 a.m., Senate Room B. The Republican Caucus will meet at 11:30 a.m. in Senate Room 2. The Democratic Caucus will meet at 11:30 a.m. in Senate Room 1. Judicial nomination forms are available at the clerk's desk. Please see either Tara or Sarah.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Senator from Lynchburg, Senator Newman.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate do now adjourn until 12 noon tomorrow.
Thank you, Senator. The question is, shall the Senate adjourn until 12 o'clock noon tomorrow? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate stands adjourned until 12 o'clock noon tomorrow.